I'm Pat Nevin.
This is Ali Riley.
Hi, this is Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and you're listening to the London is Blue podcast.
Welcome back, Chelsea fans, to another episode of the London is Blue podcast, your home for all things Chelsea FC. Dan, Mike, Nick, and myself cover all the match reviews from the latest Chelsea matches. We cover the team news and even throw you some exclusive interviews. Thank you already for being an awesome listener, and you know what? Let's jump right in.
Hey Chelsea fans, just a quick programming note. Dan here. Wanted to let you know that we actually went a little long and recorded this episode with guests Joe Tweeds and Sebastian Chapuis. We broke it up into two for you, so it's a little bit more digestible. Anyway, enjoy the first part now. All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another preseason episode of the London is Blue podcast. No Brandon this weekend. He's lost in the mountains of, I don't know, the north somewhere. We might find it. But we do have Nick. We do have Mike, two stalwarts. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you both doing?
Hola, amigos.
I'm doing good.
Well,
I am capable, Dan, of saying caballero. It's unbelievable.
That's important, an important skill set. And, I think because we wanted to go a little deeper into what's going on with preseason, the tactics we're seeing with Lampard, we thought we would broaden the audience here. When Brandon's away, really, the London is Blue podcast will definitely play. And we did so, one, with a returning guest in Joe Tweeds. Joe, welcome back.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
We are all doing well. We're glad to have you. And then we also brought, every Sarista's favorite Twitter follower in Seb or Sebastian to join us. Welcome to the podcast for the first time.
Hi, guys. I'm good. Thanks you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are definitely glad to have you, and we can't wait to dig into some of those insights that you've been sharing on Twitter and on the matches so far. But before that, we'll get into a couple quick things. We do have two new iTunes reviews, one from a username that somehow made it past the quality filter from Apple that we won't read, from Australia. Said he was a latecomer to this fantastic podcast about Chelsea, but I'm loving it. As an Englishman now living in Australia, it's great to keep up with the news and opinions with people as passionate about the club as I am. And then we also had one from Jerbear8989, also one of our Patreon members from Canada. Love the show. The insight is great and engaging. The show has a great flow, and it's all Chelsea. Must listen to those who have not listened yet. Keep up the great work, and go Chelsea, go, Jerry. So some nice iTunes reviews there, Nick.
Yes, we somehow keep getting these after all this time, which is really great. We're really happy that we've crossed this 500 5-star iTunes review threshold, Dan. It's pretty incredible for us, and it just helps us get seen on all of these, on Apple Podcasts and when you search for Chelsea podcasts. So the more that we get of these, the better off we'll be ranked, and it's all good for us, right?
It is the best for us. And then the other thing is no new Patreon members this week, but you can join us there. The conversation is kicking off on Discord, one of the reward tiers that we have. And not only does that allow us to kind of have some more funds to put together this great podcast, but allows us to kind of have that wonderful community put together, Mike. And there's a lot of chatter during the matches, which is always a good fun time to be had.
Yeah, and it's not just about the matches too. This is, your place to be for all things Chelsea throughout the week, and be it matches, players, transfers, or just off-topic things. It's like being at the pub with my group, but all week long. So the place to be.
All right, and before we get into the full match review, the last thing we want to talk about that I know Nick is super excited about, we're all excited about, is the contest we are running with Talisman Caps, based out of Minneapolis or St. Paul, Minnesota. And why don't you give us a little rundown, Nick?
Correct. So this has been live since Thursday, so a few days now, on our Instagram and on our Twitter. It's really simple. They're doing a great giveaway. They produce this and Tweeds actually hit us up on WhatsApp. They produce some really quality caps, and they also have a really great polo. So it's really great stuff, and they're partnered with us. So we're doing a little giveaway. You get the option of picking one of 3 caps if you win. They have some really good stuff there, a polo, and then one of their support local shirts. All you have to do to enter this thing is either on Twitter or Instagram, whichever your favorite platform is, tag 3 friends, follow us, follow Talisman at Talisman Caps, and then comment, in the same stream about which Chelsea or Chelsea youth product or loanee that you're excited about seeing to play in 2019-2020. So we will discuss some of those options, Dan, in this podcast. Some people are really psyched about the likes of perhaps a Billy Gilmore already. But that's kind of the gist. So the rules are listed on our Instagram and on our Twitter. It is a U.S. contest only, so sorry to our international fans. We'll be doing more with you as the season progresses. And then Dan, if people can't wait to receive a quality Talisman product, what could they do that we're also going to help them out with?
Well, simple. Code London Blue, 10% off first order of $35 or more, and most of their hats are right about the $35 range, so you're saving 10% off. Really that first hat that you buy, but maybe you want more. They've got a lot of U.S. women's products as well, U.S. women's national team products, and it's always good to buy things that are centered around championship-winning teams.
Correct. So visit their website, visit our Instagram and Twitter, and yeah, we're really excited to do this. We will be announcing the winner sometime late this week by the time you're listening.
Excellent. Well, good to get that out of the way. Now we will get into the match review. We will break it down with our wonderful guests, but it was against St. Patrick's Athletic. It was at Richmond Park. It was on July 13th, 2019, and the score ended 4-0, a much better scoreline than the first preseason match. We had goals from Mason Mount in the 14th minute, Emerson in the 31st minute, and then Giroux in the 67th and 88th minute, continuing that wonderful Europa League form that we all know and love him for. So, Mike, why don't you run us through the first half lineup, because this was another match where we saw the switching half to half, giving each of the players a 45-minute run out.
Sure. It would be a Willie Caballero, 2 L's, making
Is that how you say that?
That is how you say it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Caballero?
Yeah, or you can call him Willie C if you're having trouble with the L's. We had Zappacosta, Tamori, and Luiz as our center backs. Emerson on the left, and then we had a diamond with Jorginho, Mount, Kovacic, and Barkley, and then a Frank Lampard special with Tammy and Batshuayi up top.
Do my eyes deceive me? Were there 2 strikers in this lineup?
There were.
Wow.
Yeah, shocking.
I didn't know that was legal, Dan.
Only in FIFA, I believe.
Well, I mean, here's the real question. Joe, can you remember the last time you saw 2 strikers on the pitch for Chelsea?
Oof. This might have been under Conte once, Batshuayi and Costa at Watford, I want to say.
Yes.
But, I mean, regularly, Anelka, Drogba maybe under Ancelotti, and probably before that Crespo and Drogba as well. I mean, it's not been a regular thing for Chelsea for definitely for some time. Maybe the odd one off under Conte, but definitely not something that we've seen with any regularity over the course of a season for years, it feels like.
Yeah, and to be honest, most of the time we played with 2 strikers. There was one shoved on the wing. Shevchenko used to play on the wing, Anelka as well, and we never really played with 2 up top. It was really 1 up top and 1 wide or in support striker, but never 2 out and out like this time.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Seb. But even like the Torres days, like he would get pushed wide if Drogba was playing up top. So I think you're dead on there.
So why don't we kind of break this down? Because I think the big talking point during the match and in the hours and days afterwards has been the midfield diamond. And if you haven't read the wonderful Twitter thread that Seb put together on explaining the process about from build up all the way through kind of the movement and the passing to create this formation, Seb, why don't you run us through just maybe at like a high level, like what Frank is actually trying to do with the diamond that's different than what we've seen from a midfield at Chelsea for quite some time.
Yeah, but I think the first priority was to build a team with the players at disposal, considering that our wingers are out. Willian is out, Hudson-Odoi, of course, so he was stuffed with a lot of midfielders. So he had to build a lineup, and it's typically all coach are thinking about the diamond all the time, and because they feel they have too much midfielders and not enough wide players, so it's always a challenge to make the step and actually fill the lineup up in Diamond, and Lampard decided that it was the best choice with the players at disposal. In fact, it's when you don't have real wingers and or you want to play two strikers up top and you don't want to lose control in midfield. So you have four midfielders and two strikers, as opposed to when you play a 4-4-2 and you have only two or three center midfielders and wingers who tend to give the ball away and not defend as much as midfielders. So I think the idea was to play as much midfielders as possible today, because there was a lot of players available today in that game.
Were you surprised at all, Seb, to see Barkley at the tip of the diamond instead of Mason Mount?
No, not really, because to be honest, maybe Mount is better positioned and maybe better tactically to move and to understand his role that maybe Barkley, who's an impact player. Even if he starts games, he tends to show for the ball, try to do a thing, but he's not really someone to play the diamond. And going back to the time we used to play diamond under Ancelotti, it was a challenge for players like Essien or anyone who was not Lampard or Ballack struggled to play the diamond. I remember Essien losing position a lot of times, and Ballack was tactically able to switch between roles, because it's really demanding in terms of running for the side midfielders, so Kovacic and Mount. So they can run a lot, but they need to understand where to run, who to close down, and because if you're not good enough tactically, it's a nightmare for the whole team, because the wing is exposed all the time. So maybe it was the choice to have the more disciplined player in Mount in midfield and Barkley close to the strikers, because sometimes he can hit the target with a shot.
That's a very fair point there as well. And so I think, Mike, what did you like that you were seeing when we were kind of playing this formation? Was there anything that you appreciated that you were seeing in the way that, again, I think Seb was talking about, Lampard tried to take advantage of the resources we had, which is a bunch of midfielders and not a lot of wingers in this match?
Yeah, I appreciated it. I think this is a very, as said, it's a tough situation to be in. And I think also what we're doing is we're watching Lamps try and figure out who can make the cut. I feel like this is one giant version of Hard Knocks. And, I think he's being pretty fair and allowing some of these young guys to get on the field to see if he can make something work and he can elevate them to the first team this season. And also just trying to make sure that, everyone's getting a fair shake. And I love that we're trying out multiple different scenarios instead of just trying to hammer down the same thing over and over again, which might not work. So from a flexibility perspective and the ability to change and also realize that, different people are going to play different things, I'm so excited. And, with Seb's comment about the lack of wingers, it just makes the arrival of a certain American I'm just cannot wait. So, well, Nick, take it away.
I think I'm going to pass this to Joe, but I think the comments that were made after the game, Joe, were that Frank was looking for players who are a little bit more tactically flexible, right? So depending either on availability or based on key matchups, against an opponent like Manchester United, maybe it's important that his midfield can do more than just play in a 4-3-3 and that's it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Seb said there was very important for people to understand, is that last season we saw a manager trying to sort of fit a style of play or necessarily try and force a system on players that it didn't always kind of fit at times. And what we've seen already with Lampard, particularly with a diamond midfield, is Lampard's acknowledgement that Chelsea are probably at the moment, in terms of quality of players and let's say, in terms of age and capability of pressing and running and all sort of the components that are required to play a sort of high octane style of football. He's shown that there's a willingness to adapt to what's available. I think in terms of the diamond midfield, we won't necessarily see it all the time. It's a system that works if let's say the opposing teams fullbacks aren't that great. So I'm not expecting us to play Liverpool and let Trent Alexander-Arnold sort of maraud down the right hand side, because obviously with wingers and with a midfield three, you've got more capability to cover sort of wide areas of the pitch. But I think it's shown a willingness to adapt to what's there, and I think Lampard, particularly with Morris and Edwards, who have been used to coaching incredibly sort of tactically flexible players as part of the academy, and what we saw at Derby with them sort of going through kind of cycling through several styles, several systems, several kind of ways of playing, until they sort of come on to a formula that allowed them to sort of make that little surge to the playoff final. It's going to be an interesting thing to see this season, just how much adaptations we do from week to week. I think there'll be a general way of playing against like quote unquote lesser sides. I think that there'll sort of be a kind of emphasis on this sort of quick sort of combination play and a lot more. I don't want to use the word direct as in sort of back to front sort of long balls, but players being more incisive and being more aggressive with their sort of attacking play. And then I think we'll see a slightly different style of play, maybe more counter-attacking, a little bit more reactive when we play sort of the Cities and Liverpools of this world. And I think that probably from last season, that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to is, yes, it would be great if we could go toe-to-toe with City and Liverpool, but I'm not entirely sure we have the squad to do so yet. But so I'm fairly confident, actually, when we come to these games, when we see Lampard, Morris, Edwards, etc., kind of scheming and putting together a game plan that will actually look to kind of target their weaknesses and hit them on the counter. So, yeah, flexibility is going to be key. I think that's sort of why you've seen sort of Mason Mount play kind of these sort of Carrello or Shuttler kind of positions on the side of a diamond. Also, you can play the number 10 role, but it's going to be an interesting to see sort of how things kind of piece together, particularly with N'Golo Kante coming back into the fray, because I think he gives Lampard an inordinate amount of flexibility going forward, just where he can play him in terms of his position, either in a sort of double pivot in midfield or as kind of a destroyer, ball recoverer in midfield as well. So yeah, I think it is exciting, definitely, after the two games we've seen in Ireland.
I think that's a good question or kind of thought process there, just we're on the topic of N'Golo Kante. So, Seb, how do you see, obviously Frank at the press conference laughed when he said he knew exactly how he was going to play N'Golo Kante, but he wasn't going to tell anybody. Where do you see him lining up, and how do you see Lampard taking advantage of him in the coming season?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's a perfect midfielder for midfield 2, because when you play 4-2-3-1 today, it allows you to play one more player in attack, often a winger or an attacking midfielder. And the thing with base midfield players is that nowadays everyone has played against team playing like that, so it's easy to figure out to isolate players. So he's much more than just a player sitting in front of the defense. So I think Lampard knows he is going to play him in a midfield 2. I think he laughed in press conference because I think he knew he would be asked a question that would be interpreted as digs as Sarri, but it's not the case. He said he's going to adapt to use Conte in his best position, and I think deep inside he knows every answer is going to give is going to be interpreted as a slight dig to Sarri. And but I think we're going to see Conte in the midfield 2, maybe sometimes on the side of a midfield 3, diamond or 4-3-3, but I don't think we are going to see him at the base of midfield 3. I don't think.
Is that due to his passing range, do you think?
Yeah. I think he's able to cover a lot of ground. Usually, when you go back to why teams have played players behind the striker or at the base of midfield, it's because they can't run like they did before, or they can't run at all. And it's a way to have players behind them or ahead of them, able to bring the ball forward. So usually you play very good passers at the base of midfield or support strikers behind the strikers, but who can't run or can't defend as much as midfielder. So I think he's a really modern midfielder. There's more and more players abroad like that, because most of the time they play a lot of football besides clubs, and they only go to clubs at 13, 15, and they fit into teams, but they are playing much more football than just at clubs. So there's a lot of players brought to play that modern midfield role, and not being forced to play one position at one age and never go out of that position.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's super helpful to think. Again, I don't think that everything that Frank says is a slight against Sarri, where people want to make this narrative that every positive thing he's doing is something that is against him. I think he's just looking to set up the side as best as he possibly can and try to go out and win football matches.
Exactly.
So, I think another thing that we saw, we've talked a lot about the midfields in the first half, but I think we also saw a little bit of the defenders and that their work they're doing. And I know that you had a piece to come out just today on We Ain't Got No History as well, Seb, going through the defenders and what we would expect to see from them with Lampard. What were you seeing maybe in like Luis and Tomori and the way that they were playing together in the first half?
It was good. I think I don't think Lampard was strict in terms of instructions. I think it didn't put boundaries such as never play a long ball or always play short or whatever. They've been able to play a long pass over the top or drive with the ball. And you see when managers give freedom to players, it's when they go beyond the midfield line and they don't feel the need to give the ball quickly to the nearest player. That usually means that the manager is not too strict on never lose position, never give the ball away. So there's been times where Tomori has been on the ball and hasn't been closed down, so kept running at players. So that's interesting. And I think maybe we are going to see defenders going further than they did under Sarri, but it's good as long as they can find solutions, and they don't do that all the time. But variety is always good for defenders because it's easy to implement a pressing to block the 2 or 3 circuits to play out, and the more options there is, the better. And David Luiz is really, really good in that aspect because he can play short, long, the blind pass, the diagonal, every type of pass he can play. So as long as the players are moving correctly ahead of them, it's good. It's not limiting to. It's good to have players, especially at the back, trying all sorts of things to play the ball out.
Well, and Joe, I actually, on the coverage, there was an interesting point, and I kind of want to get your perspective on this, that Tomori was typically played as like a left central defender last year instead of, where he was played on the right with Luiz. And the coverage said that was due to, the personnel at Derby and his flexibility essentially to play either one of those roles, but that he was more comfortable on the right. Did you get that sense, and did you see some really good interchange between him and Luiz?
Yeah, and going back to some of the academy sort of days with Tomori, I mean, he's very comfortable as playing as a right back as well, and it's no surprise really that he can slot in at both centre back positions. I think as players mature, they tend to sort of stick to one side of the pitch. Obviously, John Terry very famously was a left-sided central defender, and anyone who paired with him had to play on the right. I think probably on the right-hand side most likely benefits Tomori more. I think he's a little bit more comfortable receiving the ball. It's easier for him to open up his body and play passes to either the fullback or to midfielders. I just think that he, probably in a later piece or in one of the later segments we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail, but he reminds me so much of William Gallas when he came to Chelsea, sort of similar athletic profile, sort of similar kind of skill set on the ball. And I think, given his age and given sort of how centre-backs today, I mean, there are a couple of exceptions, but mostly sort of tend to mature in their sort of mid to late 20s, that his kind of ceiling is incredibly high when you think about sort of the improvements that he can make, both from a technical perspective on the ball, but also just as an experience perspective from playing the sort of central defensive role. And having Luiz as kind of his, kind of mentor, I think is a good thing as well. And I think obviously the main thing that Tomori provides for Luiz is just, he has exceptional recovery pace. He might be the quickest player in the Chelsea squad now that he's come back. So it kind of gives Luiz a little bit more freedom to be a bit more aggressive in terms of when he's pressing onto centre forwards or when he's sort of looking to be the aggressor in the kind of relationship. But I think probably the last thing on this is that it's very interesting that I think, Luiz is partnering Tomori at the moment. It might be because obviously Rudiger's out, and Tomori maybe has the most similar kind of profile in terms of skill set comparable to Rudiger. So, but it's very interesting that he's being played with Luiz, because I think that might be the partnership that starts the first game of the season. Obviously Lampard and Morris are very familiar with Tomori from last season. Joe Edwards has also coached Tomori, sort of across the academy age groups that they've been sort of part of as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is sort of the partnership that we're seeing going forward. And it just means also as well that, even with, let's say, if Azpilicueta starts at right back and his pace is declining a little bit, having Tomori there is also a bit of a comfort blanket for him as well.
Going back to what Joe said, usually when, especially in pre-season, managers tend to put the more experienced central defender on the left. And if they have two right-footed, they're going to play the best one, the more experienced one on the left, and to have the younger, the rookie on the right. And it was the same earlier, and we had Zuma on the left against Bohemians, and Tomori on the right, I think. So that the youngest players on his right foot to receive it's easier. So it depends also on the amount of ball playing Lampard expects. So if you have someone like Mourinho, he's not going to ask a lot of things from his central defender. So it's not going to be very important if the left and right are on the right foot or correct foot on the strong foot to play forward, because they're just going to play the ball to the midfielders and that's all. And when you expect them to drive with the ball, it's better if they are really at ease with that. And maybe David Luiz is more at ease to play on the left than on the right, because he can find angles and drive forward with the ball. But most of the time it's about experience, and put the more experienced one on the left.
Yeah. So not to linger on center backs too long, but as the resident center back on the pod, so Joe and Seb, what I'm curious is, if you are not looking at current injuries, who is your best center back pairing for Frank this season?
So I'll caveat this by saying one thing. I mean, I appreciate sort of the modern trend in football to have centre backs who are capable of bringing the ball up, capable of playing decent passes. However, what I will say is that looking at last season, I think Chelsea don't really have the luxury of being able to pick one of those players at the moment. I think we were susceptible to crosses. I don't think necessarily that maybe due to the sort of structure that Sarri put in place, that the two centre backs were left exposed on counter attacks, etc. So I would probably go with a little bit more of a safe pairing. Zuma for me probably starts. I think I don't really care so much that if he looks a bit awkward in possession and maybe that isn't the most aesthetically pleasing centre half. I think historically, at least for Chelsea, he's always had the best performances against people like Sergio Aguero and Harry Kane and sort of the top centre forwards. I think Zuma's always performed the best kind of individually against them. And then I probably would pair him with David Luiz. I'm not super high on Rudiger compared to other people. I think Zuma is a better pure defender. I think he's a little bit stronger as well, and I would pair him with Luiz, at least for the first part of the season. That would be my preferred pairing.
Yeah, I agree.
That was that easy to get consensus. That's maybe a first time on the show. All right, so I think the last thing maybe we would want to talk about in the first half is I know that one of my favorite tweets of the bunch was your commentary on some of the set pieces that we saw. And how we don't have a multitude of different corner routines at this moment, and we have balls that actually make it past the first man, which is going to be a really interesting trend for people to observe this season. So maybe could you break it down? Like, what do you think Frank is kind of asking of our players in terms of the set piece execution, the kind of the corner kicks that we saw? I mean, not a ton this match. There are only 6 of them in total, but we did get a chance to maybe start to understand what that narrative is going to look like when we actually have those opportunities in a match.
Yeah. So I've worked a lot on in my job to break down corner kicks. So I've been doing that a lot this season. But no, the first priority is to have a good corner taker. So it's a priority. If you don't have a taker, it's not even worth going beyond who gets in the box, who gets behind, because the corner never comes. So that's why it was always a surprise to see Fabregas featuring so little last season, because he was a good corner taker. So you can't expect miracles if players are not good to put a good cross in. It's not. There's no point having 3 corner routines, let alone 39, if the ball can beat the first man. So yeah, Mount was a positive point in that regard, because he has been able to take really good corners. And after that, it's quite simple, because you have players who are going to flick the ball at the near post. David Luiz has been doing that for PSG, for Brazil as well. And after that, you need to clear the center of the goal, which is usually the zone the goalkeeper is going to reach out to claim the cross. So sometimes you're going to get the ball first, sometimes you're going to clatter the goalkeeper. That happens. And when you have a lot of big guys at the near post, it's good to have players to tap in at the far post, the flick. And it's good to see that there's been a player on the goalkeeper to try to maybe it was a friendly game, so maybe Batshuayi wasn't actually fouling the goalkeeper, but in the league we can expect someone like Diego Costa used to in the past stay in front of the goalkeeper and make sure he can't go out and claim the cross, consider foul one every 2 games. But now it's good to have a lot of players flicking the ball at the near post, players attacking the center, and vacating the space to have players tapping the ball at the far post. Because when Joe was speaking about Gallas the other day, but Gallas always had 3-4 goals per season, Matic as well. And when you add up, it's always good to have defenders who have 1, 2, 3 assists. Terry used to have 2 or 3 assists because he flicked the ball a lot, and you just have to tap in the ball at the far post. It's an extra goals. You can get maybe 4, 5, 6 extra goals every season with that, having players at the back post. So when you think we had the 63 goals, I think, this season, it's the second or third worst tally. It's always good to consider options to get maybe 3, 4, 5 goals more. It's better against certain teams when you can score in open play. It's good to have them having good strategies to attack space in the box and try to score.
So what I'm hearing, Seb, is that it's better to beat the first man on the corner. So that's good. Okay. So hey, Joe, one of the final things in the first half that I wanted to touch on that I was impressed by, I think, was the interchange, if not the final product, between Tammy and Batshuayi. And my kind of take on this is that Batshuayi's looked very hungry to this point. This is the kind of reinvigoration of his, potentially his Chelsea career, and then this is the first that we're really seeing of Tammy to this point. So, just wanted to get your thoughts on what you saw between them from the first half.
Yeah, so Batshuayi he's had a peculiar career so far, because he always was a second fiddle to a centre forward, and his big breakthrough season at Marseille, he was the only senior striker in the team. Steven Fletcher joined at midway through the season, but either he was second fiddle because the managers didn't trust him to play up top, several managers, because he doesn't offer enough in open play. But one thing it's for sure is when the ball is in the box, is always the right finish, always the right positioning, and so is dynamic because he's 25, and maybe that's the thing I didn't want to put too much focus on, because I know it's a preseason game and he's trying to get a place in the starting lineup. So, but you can see in his involvement, that he's a poacher. So he's considering shooting at goal or passing the ball for someone to cross, but he's not going to set up other a lot. And but that's his mindset. Is a type of striker only focused on scoring goals, so that's good to have someone like that. And Abraham, I think it's good because he's young, and probably when he's going, not now, but when he's going to go near 25, 30s, he's going to be more immobile and when he's young, he's able to run a lot down the channels, running behind as well. He's trying his chance, and he's trying a lot of things. So he can do a lot of things as for now. He can run down the side, he can ask in behind because he's dynamic. But maybe if he gets stronger, maybe he's going to lose a bit of mobility and become a real target man. But it was good to see, the interchange. It doesn't require a lot of understanding. It's just about trying to see what the other is doing, and if the one comes short, I'm going to ask in behind. If the other is asking in behind, maybe I can show up short for the ball. So it's good to see two players who are going to compete and already showing that they are hungry to score and moving in relation to one another.
Yeah, there was a quick moment where Tammy had done a ton of work in the box and he could have easily slotted it to Batshuayi for pretty easy, but he took it himself. And again, I think what I'm hoping to see under Frank is a lot of competition and young guys pushing young guys, Mason and Christian pushing each other and elsewhere. But good options.
So we've
overall.
spent a lot of time talking about the first half, and I think the second half, as Nick and I were preparing the script today, there was not a lot of thought around the second half being as exciting as the first half, but there was, I think, a bright spot that we do want to talk about, and Joe has put together a pretty good piece on one Billy Gilmour and what he is offering to Frank and offering this side. So, Joe, consider this your platform to espouse the virtue and preach the gospel of Billy Gilmour, Scottish Messi.
I'm going with the Scottish Silver. But yeah. I think he's a very interesting prospect, mate, because you look at sort of Chelsea kind of playmakers in this mould historically. We've had lots of these sorts of players. We've had Joshua McEachran, Charlie Colkett. There have been sort of a number of these sort of diminutive players who have been able to play as a number 6, as a holding player, as sort of a traditional number 8, and as a number 10. But I think Gilmour for me has a bit of an edge on all of them, actually, including McEachran as well. His range of passing, his vision, his ability to receive the ball in tight areas, and it's kind of the willingness for an 18-year-old to want to take the ball in sort of tight areas as well. The confidence that he has on the ball rarely gives the kind of ball away as well. He's just, I think, when you look at a lot of the players we've got a lot of physical kind of players who are maybe slightly more traditionally English. I think it wouldn't be surprised if Gilmour had come from sort of a kind of Barcelona style school of football rather than, let's say, Glasgow Rangers, who are probably very kind of traditionally British in terms of their sort of academy setup. So I think what he's done on the tour for me is sort of take the opportunity that I think Lampard and Morris and Edwards, etc., have kind of offered to the younger players. And if you sort of do your part of the equation, you will get opportunities in the first team. And I think in the second half, he was playing with Bakayoko, and I think he was playing with Palmer, Pedro, etc. He sort of looked like the seasoned player on the pitch, and I think that's something that you'll see. The more that you watch him, he always looks sort of more mature than those people he's playing with, and that's something that's followed him kind of through age group football. And I wrote sort of in the article that he's often spoke about his kind of real sort of love of Cesc Fabregas as a player, and I think actually sort of the more you watch him play, particularly when he receives the ball, the one thing that I do love about Fabregas is that his head is constantly on a swivel even as the ball is coming sort of to be received to him. And Gilmour sort of also has kind of adapted this part of his game. He's kind of included it into what he does now. He's so aware of everything around him. He has this great ability sort of to create these sort of pictures of what's going on. He plays these blind passes. He plays these first time balls. I think again the fact that he's sort of got a lot of success playing deeper for Chelsea is an interesting prospect, because traditionally in the Premier League we're looking at midfielders becoming more physical. 6'3", 6'2". These sort of absolute tanks like Pogba and Loftus-Cheek and sort of players of this sort of physicality. Whereas Gilmour is maybe slightly more of a Bernardo Silva, David Silva. And I made sort of the comparisons to sort of a Xavi and Iniesta, not obviously in terms of skill set where he is at the moment, but just that ability to sort of glide around midfield and create sort of space with his first touch, and his appreciation of the ball in terms of how he uses it, his passing ability. It's always to the right foot. It's always at the right speed. He can switch play. He can ping passes. He can float them. He has this fantastic kind of reverse swing that he puts on the ball as well when he sort of strikes it. So I think that he's been a guy over the last 18 months that I think has really, really worked hard at his game. When you see his individual action plan that Chelsea gave him, the strides that he's made since coming, and he did score against Arsenal's academy on his debut. From that point until now, he looks like he belongs in Chelsea's first team squad. Whether he stays this season and plays under 23 football or moves out on loan is a question probably for later in the podcast. But he's for me certainly one of the more interesting prospects that we've got. And I think the thing that goes in his favour is that he's very much unlike what other sort of midfielders that Chelsea have. This sort of capability of playing pretty much anywhere in midfield, great range of passing, and his passing adapts as he kind of moves through the pitch. He can play those sort of nice through balls in sort of the final third. He can break the lines of his passing. He's just got such a lovely sort of style of play. And I think if you were then to sort of encourage that and see how he develops over the next 1 or 2 years, I think Chelsea have got a very, very serious prospect on their hands. And I think the other thing to boot it, as well, is that he's already playing under 21 football for Scotland as an international. Wouldn't surprise me if he has a really good loan spell, that he becomes part of the Scotland setup maybe over the next sort of year as well. But yeah, I think he's just a fantastic prospect. Another one of these players that hopefully now we've sort of got the potential pathway with Lampard, etc. Into sort of the first team squad. He for me is one to keep an eye on, because he's just a wonderfully balanced player, and I think he can really add something to Chelsea's midfield within sort of the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we read about constantly, and I probably is just developing into his overall narrative, is his leadership ability. Our friend Jake Cohen was talking about even coming through kind of the under 15s and under 19s, and playing for Rangers, and just exhibiting this not only confidence. Confidence is one thing, but the ability to lead is a whole other thing when you're that young and relatively inexperienced, Joe. So are you hearing the same types of things and kind of around his abilities?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that plays into his confidence as a player. I know he's sort of captained Scotland through the age groups as well. And generally sort of the feedback that I hear, at least from people around the club and people who work with him, is that he, in terms of his attitude, he's almost kind of the ideal sort of player that you want to work with. His attention to detail, his ability to receive criticism and work on that is fantastic. But as you say, I mean, just generally, and just in terms of his sort of own kind of personal style, he's an incredible leader. He speaks very well. I think that's also something which I think kind of suggests that he has a football intelligence or football IQ that's better than most 18-year-old players, and he's just turned 18 as well. Listened to him on a few sort of BBC interviews, and he did a show up in Scotland recently as well, where he speaks very intelligently about the game. And I think that he would be one of those players that, because he always wants to accept responsibility on the pitch. Sometimes you see young players hide for the ball if things are going badly for them. He's always there and always wants to receive the ball. And I think that sort of leadership in terms of both performance and just his character and personality. He's an on-the-pitch leader in terms of actions, but also I think in terms of just his personality and his nature as well. I think he leads by example. And it's that for me is what separates him potentially from players like we've seen, like Charlie Colkett, who was a great passer, McEachran, who also was a very good passer of the ball and a nice sort of player to watch. I think Gilmour has a little bit more street smarts. I think he's got a little bit more edge to his game. He's got a little bit more of a spiky nature. It might be because he's a Glaswegian. He's got that sort of Glasgow backbone in him, that he's a little bit more combative. He's a little bit more savvy. And I think hopefully, if he stays around the squad, he could be a player that features in the League Cup or FA Cups and maybe sort of progresses towards more minutes towards the end of the season. But it wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility that he goes on loan to somewhere in the Championship and becomes a real sort of talent for someone potentially, hopefully, like a top 6 team or a team aiming for the playoffs. But leadership qualities are things that I think a lot of players are born with, and I think Gilmour definitely, in terms of the way that he's sort of managed himself since he's been at Chelsea, suggests that he's not just a great player, but that he's going to be one of these players that has the sort of character and the sort of nature that you associate with Chelsea players of the past. So that's also an incredible positive thing about him and his game.
Joe and Seb, one of the things that has really been a hugely important kind of impact action that Frank took this season is the kind of smashing that glass ceiling between the youth team and the senior team, in both allowing them to practice together and also eat together. Can you talk about kind of the impact of what this is, both for the youth players being able to come up and see these guys and practice with them, but also kind of what the impact is towards the senior players in making sure that we kind of get past the malaise of like this past season where it felt like we were sleeping for the first 15 minutes of the game, 20 minutes of the game, or until goal was conceded.
Yeah. So it's not always an easy question to tackle, because sometimes clubs decide that it's good to have young players work hard before they get into the first team. And sometimes, especially in modern football, you get younger players who think they have done it all already, because they're already training with the pros, they have a squad number, they have a locker in the first team dressing room. And it didn't used to be like that before. And you just managers would call into action a youngster for a training session or whatever, and they wouldn't be used to be part of the first team picture like they could be right now, as I said, with a squad number, permanent stay in the dressing room, etc. So, but at the same time, it's really hard for a young player, because fans really need to take into account that there's a lot of sacrifice behind being promising 18 years old or 19-year-old at Chelsea. There's a lot of sacrifice, moving out, training hard 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week. So it's really frustrating. For a player to not feel that the door is open, because talent is good to break the glass, but sometimes opportunities is very important in football, because sometimes it's a matter of how many players are playing in a position. If you have a lot of fullbacks, of young fullbacks, it's hard to get a first team shot. If there's a player injured, of course, we can remember Jeremy Boga 2 years ago. Maybe he wasn't going to be the next Eden Hazard, but he was a promising player. He came through the academy at Chelsea, and for a conjuncture of reasons, he started the season against Burnley, and because Cahill took a red, no, it was a Courtois, I don't remember, because of the red card, he was hooked after 23 minutes, I think, and never came into the picture again. So sometimes the opportunity is going to show up once, and if players feel the opportunity isn't going to occur at all, it's frustrating, and you can't blame young players feeling that they won't get considered into the first team, and they are going to look for a pathway in the first team elsewhere. So it's good to open the door, but at the same time there's consequence, because sometimes you have players, maybe like Kennedy, if you see he was brought into the first team, not even as an academy player, and he hasn't delivered on and off the pitch, because maybe it was too much too soon. So it's a difficult balance to find, but you can't expect as a club to have a prospect staying in your club if they don't feel there's an opportunity. So it's good to open the door, and it's about management to keep them focused and not drift off from the main objective.
So as we kind of wrap on the second half and kind of thinking about the players that did succeed or look successful, were anything other notes that people wanted to go through from second half? So we kind of talked about Gilmour and a chance to look into what he represents for the academy and kind of this opportunity for players to make a transition from the first from playing for the youth to playing for the first team. But any other highlights or call-outs from the second half that we maybe didn't touch on, Seb?
No, but maybe the fact that we have had 4 half of football so far, and he's tried several things. And it was interesting to see an instance that the 4-2-3-1 we played in the first game wasn't quite the same as the one we played against St. Patrick's. The movement wasn't the same, and football tactics, it's not rocket science. Sometimes it's just about managers asking specific things from players. Sometimes the fullbacks are going to run up and down. Sometimes the midfielder are going to collect the ball short. Sometimes the midfielder are going to be asked to go forward. And it was interesting to see that with the same base system, the instructions were the same and the movement were the same. And maybe it was a good opportunity to point out that defensively, the pressing is already looking good in terms of organization. If the players are looking coordinated between each other, but they are really showing that they are willing to run a lot, and there's no players who looks like he's not doing 100%. They are all trying to prove they can play in that team, and especially behind the striker, maybe Palmer was made a good impression behind the striker like Gallagher, and they have been able to get on the ball, show for the ball, and work hard of the ball. So that's a promising thing for Chelsea, because most of the time when you have talented players, you play them behind the striker, but you don't expect a lot of running or defending from them. And it's a credit to the Chelsea Academy to have guys like Palmer or Gilmore being trusted to defend properly, being positioned properly, and trigger a pressing run at the right moment. So it's really interesting to see that. And they are not young players, as in you'd find players who can't run, who can't be disciplined to keep a structure. So it's promising.
Hey, Joe, I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of guys who I've not been ultra impressed with through the first two games. Bakayoko and Zuma, I think both have looked a little shaky on the ball. Bakayoko's lack of effort is a whole other thing, which is a little concerning. But I know that you're big on Zuma particularly. So what am I missing, or what am I not seeing that maybe you're higher on?
I think Bakayoko, it's fair to say, and it's starting to sort of leak publicly yesterday as well, that there is, I think, a move agreed elsewhere with him, and I think his efforts sort of reflected that. There was a pass that he made during the second half, which it split about 4 Chelsea players and ended up going out for a throw-in. He may well be a decent player. I think he looked good at Milan. He may well sort of rediscover his form, but I look back to sort of Lampard's comments about only wanting players who really wanted sort of to be here at Chelsea, and I don't think Bakayoko really has a desire to be at Chelsea. So sort of the less said about him, the better. Really, he brings a physical presence and all that sort of stuff, but you just sort of question his application. I think with Zuma, for me, it's a question of, I think he's unaesthetic when you look at him as a player. It's different to someone like David Luiz, who's sort of very sort of graceful in terms of his passing and how he receives the ball. And I think Zuma at times looks quite staccato. He looks sort of very sort of maybe robotic sometimes when he's passing. But I think the key for me will be, if you look at sort of his form at Everton last season, and the fact that he's kind of worked his way back from this sort of very serious injury, as a pure defender, and I'm looking at this purely from a defensive standpoint, comparing to last season, I trust him more in the air, and I think we were very weak at dealing with crosses and set pieces last season. I think he doesn't immediately resolve that, but I think he brings a lot of quality to that area. I think he's a better one-on-one defender, both in terms of how he defends in the penalty box, his willingness to block, his athleticism, his mobility from side to side, his ability to get a foot on something, a head, a shoulder, whatever it's going to be. And I think also as well that he has an element of leadership that I don't think we've had maybe since John Terry's left the club, in that Zuma is a very aggressive player when sort of things kick off between players. He's always the first person over, particularly for Everton last season. Zuma was always the first guy over, and I think that I'm not going to say that Chelsea have become a bit soft, but it's having someone in the team who is willing to to sort of step up when sort of required, when it does get physical in some of these big games. I look at the sort of impact that Van Dijk had at Liverpool, his physicality, his aggression, his leadership, what that sort of brought to Liverpool. I think Zuma coming back, I don't think he's as good as Van Dijk, but in terms of sort of the impact for Chelsea's back four, I think that he can have a similar impact for Chelsea. Obviously, we know he's quick, we know he's athletic, and I just think last season sometimes we lacked a little bit of that physicality at the back when we were dealing with set pieces and crosses. So, yeah, I take the point that he's never going to be confused with Frans Beckenbauer or one of these sort of great Dutch sort of sweepers in terms of his ability on the ball. I think in some cases he's a little bit underrated just because he looks awkward. I don't think necessarily that he's as bad as what some people think. There's compilations from his time at Everton where he's capable of hitting 40, 50, 60 metre passes and capable of playing through the lines and capable of hitting good passes. I just think it's one of those things where, someone who looks a bit awkward, maybe it kind of carries through to sort of the perception of them in general. But, I'm not, I suppose also say, I don't think he's necessarily had an exceptional tour of Ireland, but I would assume that sort of as he gets back into the Chelsea fold, I think, again, as we saw with him at Everton, the more games he plays, the more sort of in tune with the pace and the tempo he gets, the better he'll be. So, yeah, I think that he's, for me personally, I think he's Chelsea's best centre-back, and he would be one of the first names on my team sheet, purely for his defensive attributes. If we improve greatly in the next couple of seasons, and then you can start looking at the luxury of having a ball player at the back, then I think you can look at his position. But I think at the moment, given that we do have some weaknesses sort of in the centre-half space, I think Zuma is young, I think he's talented, I think he's a great defender first and foremost, and that's why I would have him inside.
All right, well, this is a wrap on the first episode, and the next one is coming out for you tomorrow, again with our guests Joe Tweeds and Sebastian Chouapuis. Thank you so much for listening, and until tomorrow, keep the blue flag flying high.